How long since you're a bit late? Okay.
I'll call this meeting to order, the regularly scheduled meeting of the Transportation and Public Works Committee. This day, September 23rd, 2014. I'm Councilmember Reich. I will chair the committee. I am joined by Council members Glidden, Palmisano, and Gordon. We have a quorum of committee and can proceed with today's agenda. Today we do have 9 consent items and 3 discussion items. You're now joined by Councilmember Bender. Thank you. And I'll go through the consent items. If any member of the committee wishes to pull a consent item for discussion, please indicate that. Item 1 is the non-governmental tax-exempt parcel streetlight operation fee assessment. And that's an action to designate the citywide streetlight operations fee assessments against properties exempt from ad valorem taxes and set public hearings to be held on November 10th, 2014. Item 2 is a non-governmental tax-exempt parcel street maintenance assessment, designate citywide street maintenance assessment against properties exempt from the ad valorem tax, and set public hearing to be held on November 10th, 2014. Item 3 is the 15th and 16th Avenue South Bridges over Midtown Greenway Rehabilitation Project. Authorize increase to the contract of LS Black Contractors Incorporated by $178,674.54 for a revised contract total of $2,006,024.23 to allow payment for the additional work to be performed as part of the federal project. Funds are available within the existing project budget and no additional appropriation is required. Item 4 is the Green Corps host site agreement. Authorize execution of an agreement with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency for solid waste and recycling of property services to host a Green Corps member for the 2014-2015 budget. That item will be referred to the Ways and Means Committee. Item 5 is the Government Center parking ramp, roof replacement project. Authorize increase to the contract with Burwald Roofing Incorporated by $3,674.12 for a revised contract total of $467.12 to allow the work not to include in the original scope of the project. Funds are available within the existing project. That item will be referred to the Ways and Means Committee. Item 6 is the authorized Public Works to apply for grant funding and negotiate a grant agreement with the Metropolitan Council Environmental Services Municipal Infiltration Inflow Grant Program for reimbursement of expenses for the SIP, cured in place pipe lining and repair of existing sewers. Item 7 is the Zombie Pub Crawl Block Event. Approve application for a large block event to be held on October 11th, 2014 to operate outside the time frame of allowed under ordinance. Item 8 is a couple low bids, accept low bid of Insinuform Technologies USA LLC for an estimated expenditure of $1,887,003 for the installation of large diameter cured in place pipe for Public Works Sewer Construction Division, and accept the low bid of Vortec Hydrovac for an estimated expenditure of $168,400 for storm sewer cleaning for the Sewer Construction Division. These items are referred to the Ways and Means Committee. And the final consent item today is the block event regulations. Subject matter of an ordinance amending Title 17, Chapter 455 of the Minnesota Code of Ordinances relating to streets and sidewalks, block events, reforming and streamlining block event coordination or conditions and restrictions to increase permit attainability and compliance. And that item has been authored by Councilmember Bender. The action requested is to refer whatever work needs to be done to staff. So those are the consent items before us. Does anyone want to pull any item? Seeing none, I will move all 9 items as stated. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Dissenting nay. Those items carry. We can now move to our discussion items, starting with the on-street parking mobile payment system. Director Kodke.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, committee members. We have Ronnie Toledo from our Traffic and Parking Services here this morning, and he will make a presentation on this particular item.
Good morning, Chairman Reich, council members of this committee. My name is Ronnie Toledo. I'm a parking systems analyst with Traffic and Parking Services. I want to begin this presentation with a brief summary of our on-street meter system. Starting in 2010, Public Works started to deploy new parking meter technology. Prior to that, we had the old technology where it only accepted coins. Right now, we have multi-space with credit cards, single space with credit cards, and traditional single space still with coins in our low-use, low-rate areas. In 2012, citywide installation was completed. Currently, there are 7,500 spaces on the on-street metered system. Public Works has continued to improve operations and customer service that leverage technology to further modernize the system to accept multiple payment platforms, allowing for easier enforcement, enhanced reporting capabilities for revenue, system use, and maintenance. An on-street parking mobile payment system is one such effort that we feel that will enhance a customer's parking experience. Benefits for a mobile payment system to the customer. Customers can pay parking in their cars during pleasant weather like we had last winter where it was below zero most of the time. Customers can receive text notifying them when their parking time is about to expire so they could actually add time from any location where they're at to add time up to the parking limit. Benefits to the city may reduce credit card fees. This is an added benefit to the customer, and customer absorbs a user fee if they choose to use the service. Other benefits to the city is it's minimal to no cost for the city to implement and ongoing support. It also may reduce future capital costs of parking equipment. The need for physical pay stations in the future may be reduced depending on how many, the acceptance rate of mobile parking. Earlier this year, Public Works released an RFP to solicit companies for a mobile payment system for the on-street parking meter system. 7 proposals were received and evaluated by the RFP team, which included members of traffic control, information technology, finance, and Public Works. After the initial review, 6 companies were selected to make presentations and interviews with the evaluation team. The evaluation team narrowed the submittals to 3 finalists, and these 3 finalists were invited to clarify aspects of their submittals via smart board meetings and other communications to the evaluation team. The evaluation team individually reviewed and scored the 3 finalists based on the evaluation criteria listed in front of you. I won't go over that, but after doing the scores, Park Mobile received the highest overall weighted average score. Public Works recommends selecting Park Mobile and seeks authorization to negotiate with them from council. The next steps, staff will negotiate with Park Mobile. Once terms have been finalized, Public Works will return to council and seek authorization to enter into contract. This project will be implemented in 3 phases. The first phase is limited to an area to develop the rate structure, test the enforcement application with a mobile payment, gather customer feedback, and look at the reporting tools that the company will offer. The second phase will expand the test area to additional locations throughout the city. Then the third phase, if the first 2 phases are going well, we'll implement citywide. Next steps, negotiate contract approval to enter into contract and execute contract this fall, 2014. Phase 1, we anticipated to begin late 2014, and phase 2, citywide deployment in 2015. That's my presentation. Do you guys have any questions?
Thank you very much. Are there any questions per the presentation? Councilmember Yang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With regards to Park Mobile, who are the other two finalists?
Councilmember Yang, the other two finalists were Calais and Pango.
Okay, and you know, I don't know much about this, but you know, in the industry, what is a private label solution, and what is I guess I'm guessing the other option is just to have signs all over the place. Is that kind of what's happening? Can you explain to me what that means?
A private label solution is like, for instance, the city will have it'll be a city app with the city's logo on it versus Park Mobile, but it's still run by Park Mobile.
Okay, and what's the benefit of one over the other?
Having a private label app, which Park Mobile does offer, it will differentiate us from other customers they have within the city. They might have like private lots throughout the city, and that will be a differentiation that Park Mobile or the city app is the city app.
Okay, and with Park Mobile, are we doing the private label, or are we?
We have the option to do that.
Okay, okay.
Thank you. Councilmember Glidden.
Thank you. I will say just generally, I'm excited about this technology. I think this will be a great addition to what we're offering with our parking services. I'm trying to understand a little bit of the timeline here and how you will utilize the test, because it appears you're negotiating the contract before we've done with the test, and I just want to understand how we will know our expectations are able to be met by this vendor. Maybe I'm reading this wrong, but I see that you have a test proposed, and then I assume you do some evaluation of the service provided within that test, and then you're going to expand the test to have some broader array. But how does that timeline coincide with your contract negotiations, because you're going to come back to us to approve the contract?
Councilmembers, John Wirtz, Director of Traffic and Parking Services. Councilmember Glidden, we anticipate to ink the contract before we begin the test. Most of these vendors have a good track record relative to their efforts to deploy these applications out in the field, and so we think the test component is really about getting all the nuts and bolts ironed out to make sure when we do full rollout to the customer that we have a well-working application, and that will be well received by the community. So.
Well, maybe I will ask for a little more offline conversation, but it just seems to me, how are we going to incorporate elements that may come up in the test that are unique to Minneapolis if we've negotiated the contract before we do the test? Anyway, so that would be one question. And then the other question I just have is, can you give us a little bit more of a flavor of what put this particular vendor over the top? I know you've got a pretty sophisticated scoring mechanism. You had a team, you had a developed process, so.
Can you repeat the question, please?
What kind of put this one over the top as opposed to the others? Who were the finalists?
The scoring system, it was relatively close, but it was based on the criteria that you see there. What put them over the top, in particularly, they're a leader in the U.S. since 2009. They have proven deployments in other cities similar to the size of Minneapolis. And currently, they integrate both with our Calais metered system and with our Duncan handheld enforcement system. That's another reason why they were chosen by the committee. They seem to have good reporting and back-end analytics. Another option that they have, that they could be the merchant holder instead of the city being the merchant holder. There's also branded versus non-branded, that we have that option. They also have a potential permit parking solution that they mentioned to us that wasn't part of the RFP, but we asked for information regarding that. So, but that wasn't part of the score, but they do offer that. And there's a potential of off-street and surface slot mobile payments that they have offerings to that may be used in the future in our parking system.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions per the presentation? Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Toledo, a couple of the things that I'm not quite sure how the other finalists ranked in these, but things that are of particular importance to me for the city include that this application is free to residents, while with more adoption of these kinds of technologies, I think people are willing to pay a small fee for an application or something. It is nice to see that in order to, that barrier to entry is not with cost. Another thing that I think was quite striking that you had pointed out, or someone had pointed out in earlier discussion, was that it has the lowest error rate. That this vendor versus other vendors has like 6 times less error rates in terms of just mistakes made through this application. It's important to me that TCI compliance frees up liability with the city. A couple questions that I have is it true that this solution actually helps to right size somebody's parking needs? Like, does it really give you back what you don't use? For example, if I pay for an hour of parking and I only use 37 minutes of it, does it actually, will it refund that to customers' accounts? And my second question is, you mentioned that something not in the RFP is the ability to use a vendor such as this to enhance zone regulated areas. And I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about that.
Sure. Can you repeat the first part? I'm sorry.
Sure, Mr. Chair, Mr. Toledo. The first question was, is it true that you don't pay for what you don't use in this application? Okay. Like plugging a meter and getting money back. And the second question is, could you tell us a little bit more about using a vendor such as this for our zone regulated areas?
Sure. For the first question, I don't know specifically if they have that in their app, but other vendors did have that, so that might be an option that we'll certainly explore. For as far as the second question, they do have the ability to sell online daily permits for the critical parking permits. They did provide information regarding a critical parking database solution, so that might, if we go that route, they might be able to provide that solution to us also, because our critical parking database solution's kind of antiquated.
Thank you. Any other questions for the presenter? Seeing none, the action before us is to authorize city officers to negotiate with Park Mobile USA Incorporated to provide a mobile phone payment system for on-street parking in the city, as described in the presentation. Any further discussion on the item? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Dissenting nay. That carries. Thank you very much. We'll now move to discussion item, the second discussion item, which is the South Metro Mississippi River total suspended solids, total maximum daily load conversation. And I believe we have a significant update.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Lois Eberhardt. I'm in the Surface Water and Sewers Division of Public Works. I work particularly on regulatory issues under the Clean Water Act, and today's topic is related to that. On the screen is a map of Minneapolis with our beloved water bodies. We have 3 creeks, the Mississippi River, a number of lakes, a few wetlands, and we have a permit under the Clean Water Act to discharge our stormwater runoff to the water bodies. This happens through outfalls. On the upper right is a large outfall to the Mississippi River. The lower left is a smaller outfall. probably to one of our creeks. And there's a process to look at impairments of water bodies. It's called total maximum daily load, and I'll explain that term in a moment. Again, this is under the Federal Clean Water Act that is administered by the Environmental Protection Agency, and in Minnesota, carried out by the Pollution Control Agency. And this process also involves the DNR, Department of Natural Resources. Each state must set standards for the various types of water bodies, the lakes, the creeks, the rivers, and the wetlands, for each pollutant of concern and based on the beneficial uses. So that TMDL term is related to how much pollution can a water body assimilate and still meet those state standards. So that amount is the TMDL, the total maximum daily load of that pollutant. So that is a calculation, a very long process, is undergone with a study of each water body, each pollutant, and involves the various stakeholders that discharge to that water body based on the types of beneficial uses shown on the bottom. For example, aquatic life and recreation. So today I'd like to talk about one of the studies and a successful challenge that the city has made to the methods and process in this TMDL study. The water body for this topic is a reach of the Mississippi River south of Minneapolis, just south of the Ford Dam, from the point where the Minnesota River comes into the Mississippi River and then down to Lake Pepin. For this stretch of the Mississippi River, the beneficial use that is impaired is aquatic life. The pollutant of concern is suspended solids. This is sediment, organic material, and algae that make the water cloudy or turbid, and then sunlight cannot penetrate deeply enough for a healthy plant community. This map shows the full drainage area that discharges to this segment of the river. You can barely see the segment, it's in red, and I don't think I have a way of pointing, but we're in that central area surrounded by black, which is the Twin City metro area. And you can see that this is a very large drainage area. It's almost half of Minnesota and a small portion of Wisconsin. This is an aerial photo on the cover of the report, and it shows where the Minnesota and Mississippi rivers come together. And it illustrates pretty clearly that the Minnesota River, which comes in on the bottom of the photo, carries much more suspended sediment than the Mississippi River, which is on the top. Our staff worked with the other stakeholders and the Pollution Control Agency very closely during development of the study. We disagreed with a number of the PCA's conclusions and methods and what would be required of Minneapolis in the first draft of the study. Therefore, in early 2012, the city issued formal comments to request a number of changes, and this was a report to the committee requesting support for submitting the comments and for a contested case hearing request to the commissioner of the PCA. So again, from the full drainage area, first and foremost, the draft called for a 25% reduction in discharge of suspended solids from cities. All the cities in this drainage area, regardless of where they were located, toward one of the tributaries or one of the two rivers. We commented that 25% across the board was an arbitrary number and was not based on science or benefit to the water body. We also pointed out that the stretch of the Mississippi River in Minneapolis meets the water quality standard. And in fact, it's better water quality for that standard here than Anoka, upstream of us. So we requested that Minneapolis and other cities upstream of the Ford Dam, also known as Lock and Dam 1, not be required to further reduce this type of pollutant load. We were successful in that the 25% requirement for all cities across the board was deleted, and now the cities above Lock and Dam 1 do not have a required reduction, with one exception, and that's the Crow River watershed. So that pollutant load is enough of a science-based contributor, but it was recognized that the other areas are not contributing to this problem below the confluence. On another point, in a TMDL, there needs to be some sort of a baseline so that there can be comparison between the requirements and the success, the implementation. In this study, a baseline of 2002 was proposed, and that was related to some of the regulations on the smaller cities and other dischargers. So if Minneapolis had ended up with a reduction that was required, we didn't want it to be based on 2002 because we've been doing a number of practices for decades before that, and we wanted those to count as well. This was successful too, in that that baseline year was removed. So instead, those dischargers that do have requirements are based on comparison to no improvements versus the improvements regardless of when they were put in. Another point was that the cost to cities was very high, but the benefit was very low. The projection was about $1 billion with a B dollars for the cities. That would only improve the pollutant 1.3%. And so there would be no recognizable improvement in the water body. And we made the sort of understatement that spending public money to accomplish nothing is not good public policy. This too was successful in that there are new strategies now for agriculture and less pressure on the cities. Certainly agriculture is a big pollutant because of the geology of the Minnesota River Valley, which was formed after the last glacial epoch, and it's very erodible soils. So the strategy for agriculture is more based on voluntary practices and some state funding and a lot of work with those interested parties. Then one more concern that we had was there was a clause that if the original strategies were not successful, an additional strategy might be access to funding by local units of government. So we made the point that even if we did not have a requirement, would we be asked for funding that would go to, for example, the agricultural community. That clause has been deleted, and so that was also successful. A couple of other points that we made in our comments, that urban density is a best management practice. When we think of pollutant loading per capita in the major cities across the country, it's just remarkable how efficient our systems are with transit, with density in our buildings, and also that a waste load allocation on the cities is enforceable, whereas ag activities under the Clean Water Act are voluntary. Requirements on permitted parties, such as a city, is mandatory. So that it's very important for these TMDL studies to consider cost benefit and be realistic about where the pollutants are emanating from and what will really make a difference to the water body. The final point that I want to bring up is we commented that there had not been enough stakeholder involvement on this particular study. It was developed as a companion to the Lake Pepin TMDL, which is for phosphorus, a different pollutant. which had a very large public process, and then the South Mississippi River study did not have a large process. Now I'd like to talk just a moment about the Lake Pepin study, because that is still underway. And as I mentioned, the soils in the Minnesota River are very erodible. If human settlement had not happened, Lake Pepin still would fill in over time, just from precipitation eroding the soils. And certainly the human activity has accelerated this by about tenfold. But it is a natural process, so the implementation needs to consider the reality of the climate and the soils. This chart shows when farming first started in Minnesota, in the Minnesota River, the sediment load started to creep up. It's in the past few decades that it's really arisen alarmingly because of drainage ditches. And so there are many efforts underway to work with buffers and various activities that can stop some of that erosion. But it will not completely stop. It will proceed at some level. So that is a TMDL study, total maximum daily load study, that's progressing related to phosphorus. And I'd like to show the other studies that are either underway, have completed, or have been completed, that we do have responsibility for phosphorus. So this map shows those water bodies, which are Lake Nokomis, Lake Hiawatha, Grass Lake in the southwest corner of the city, Crystal Lake, which is not in Minneapolis, it's in Robbinsdale, but we have about a 450-acre drainage area that discharges to Crystal Lake, so we do have those responsibilities. And then finally, Silver Lake, again, not in Minneapolis, it straddles the St. Anthony Village, Columbia Heights border, and we have a very small area that discharges there. So to address these impairments, some of the practices that are especially important are keeping grass clippings and leaves out of the gutter, out of the system, and various kinds of filtration practices that break down and capture those pollutants. As I mentioned, there are different studies for different pollutants of concern. Another pollutant of concern is bacteria. This map shows those water bodies that are impaired. It's the three creeks, Shingle Creek, Bassett Creek, Minnehaha Creek, and to a lesser degree, Mississippi River itself. So it's shown in a slightly different color. And this is a tough one. There are a lot of unknowns about the source of the bacteria. Possibly there are still some septic systems upstream outside of Minneapolis that are causing problems. Certainly some practices with cattle management, even with geese and wildlife. In Minneapolis, we are very careful about any kind of cross connections with our sanitary sewer system. But probably the best thing we can do in Minneapolis is more rigor with education and requirements for our pets. So people cleaning up after their dogs. Then the other pollutant, the last pollutant of concern that I'd like to talk about is chlorides. And this is the toughest one we have, because once the chlorides are in the system, they don't break down. There are no practices to eliminate them. So once they're in the soil or the water body or the groundwater, they don't move much. There's a statistic that 1 teaspoon of salt pollutes 5 gallons of water, and this is fatal to aquatic life. So the balance with public safety is, of course, the big challenge, because this is why we use salts. Other chemicals don't work as well and cost much, much more, maybe a magnitude of 100 times at the city scale. So the ongoing challenge is to use as little as necessary for public safety based on weather and site conditions. So a lot of cities are in MnDOT and the counties are experimenting with different practices of how we can use as little as possible. For example, on a street, salting the drive lanes, not letting the salt get over to the gutter right away. Salting the intersections where people apply their brakes, not necessarily the middle of the block. Using water with the salt so that it sticks and doesn't fly off into the gutter or the boulevard and where it's of absolutely no use. These kinds of things. So using it judiciously. And in closing, my purpose today is to report that staff works very closely on these impairment issues. It's critical that they be based on cost effectiveness and science, to be at the table to be sure the process is true to where the pollutants are coming from, and that implementation can be cost effective. We were successful in keeping Minneapolis from spending a lot of money for the Mississippi River TMDL without benefit to the water body. Therefore, the action we're requesting today is for City Council to authorize the Office of the City Attorney to notify the PCA that we are withdrawing our petition for a contested case hearing. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions per the presentation? Seeing none, I will just make the comment that what was accomplished was very significant, and we do celebrate the work that was done. The cost considerations that we were looking at in 2012 are astronomical. And this is not to say we celebrate, oh, we dodged a bullet, we don't have to deal with our waterways. As a matter of fact, we've got multiple decades of dealing with our waterways, and we continue working with best management practices, both new and ones that we've done tried and true, and expanding those and working with our watershed partners. So we've been in the game of cleaning up our waterways, and we've had success doing so. As a matter of fact, it's very telling to me that water coming through the Mississippi is cleaner when it goes out of the city after it comes in. That's extraordinary. It's not quite like Vienna, where the Blue Danube does run blue through Vienna. I don't know if they dye it, but it does run blue. But that's very significant. And so I just want the public to know that we don't go, oh, wow, we don't have to spend money for our waterways. We've been spending money, but we've been spending it rather wisely. And to me, the picture that does say it all, as you pointed out, is you see the Minnesota River and the Mississippi River converging. That's just such visible and obvious evidence of where we really need to do the work. And so I know, working with our partners in the broader metro, that we're going to continue that because it impacts us as well. So thank you for the report. Excellent work on behalf of the city and the taxpayers. And we move forward being good environmental stewards, even though sometimes it's not very catchy stuff that goes on the t-shirt, like total daily maximum load, in our ongoing ongoing incremental good stewardship around that. So good work. Thank you. With that, we have the motion before us as described by the presenter, which is to authorize the city attorney to withdraw the petition in the contested case hearing with the MPCA as described in the presentation. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Dissenting nay. Thank you very much. We move to our final item today, which is the North Minneapolis Greenway Outreach. Director Kaki.
Mr. Chair, this is actually a joint project between Public Works and the Health Department. So we have Bill Fellows here today from Public Works, who will explain a little bit of the Public Works participation in this. And then we have Sarah Stewart from the Health Department that will explain the Health Department's role in and I think particularly this sub-grant agreement.
Thank you. Welcome.
Chairman Wright, committee members, good morning. I am Bill Fellows with Transportation Planning and Engineering. The North Minneapolis Greenway initiative goes back to at least 2011, when Bike Walk of the Twin Cities funded a community engagement process around the Greenway concept. Several workshops and surveys were conducted, and some community support for the idea was measured. Then in 2012 and 2013, the state health department provided funds to the city of Minneapolis to further explore potential routes and greenway types. And then finally, in 2013, the Center for Prevention at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Minnesota awarded the city $405,000 for 3 years to further explore the idea. So we're currently entering year 2 of that 3-year initiative, and Blue Cross Blue Shield's funding provides a unique opportunity for Public Works and the Health Department to work together on a project. And so for this project, Public Works is managing the Technical Advisory Committee, and the Health Department, Sarah Stewart, is managing the outreach efforts. So today I'll provide an update of the progress of the Technical Advisory Committee, and Sarah will provide an update of community outreach results. So the purpose of the TAC is to support the outreach efforts by analyzing potential greenway routes and features. TAC members include representatives of community planning and economic development, Minneapolis Parks and Recreation, and the North Minneapolis Outreach Committee. The project is in a conceptual stage. No decisions regarding the route or even whether or not the project should move forward have been made. As currently envisioned, the North Minneapolis Greenway is a 3.5-mile north-south route along Humboldt and Irving Avenues between 47th Avenue North and 15th Avenue North. Some of the factors that the Technical Advisory Committee have been evaluating include traffic and parking impacts, potential utility impacts, and estimated costs. And our evaluations are based on the considerations that we understand are important to the community. That is, we want to minimize impacts to property access or emergency access, parking, traffic diversion, businesses. And at the same time, we want to maximize local community support, connectivity to existing and planned trails, parks, schools, recreation centers. We want to concentrate the route on some low volume streets and routes with few hills. So the proposed greenway is currently comprised of several different greenway types, including a full linear park, one-way half and half, and of course there's a little section of bike boulevard. So this is a rendition of what a full linear park greenway might look like. Currently about 2 of the 3.5 miles of bike or greenway are envisioned to be something like this. This would require the complete removal of the street, including parking, and replace it with a trail. About 1 mile of the greenway would be what we call half and a half, with one-way traffic, and parking would be limited to one side of the street. And about a half of a mile would be two-way traffic. And these are in areas where we believe that two-way traffic needs to be maintained. Again, parking would need to be eliminated. The majority of the streets have low traffic volumes that could be diverted to adjacent roadways. This would result in an increase in traffic on adjacent streets, approximately equivalent to one vehicle every 2 minutes during peak periods, just to try to quantify that a little bit. It would be closing intersections would maximize north-south movements along the greenway. And over the 3.5-mile route, we believe that there are at least 4 intersections that must remain open, but there maybe is around 13 intersections that could be closed or at least restricted to authorized vehicles. Parking is a concern. We completed parking counts during winter parking restrictions, and based on these counts, parking needs could be accounted for on adjacent side streets. However, there's right now, there are about 400 parcels that would lose parking and potentially access in front of their property. And finally, the estimated cost for the North Minneapolis Greenway as currently envisioned is about $16 million. And with that, Sarah Stewart of the Health Department is here to provide an update of the outreach efforts, after which we'd be pleased to try to address any questions.
Thank you. Welcome.
Good morning, Councilmember Rank, committee members. My name is Sarah Stewart, and I work with the Health Department. And the Health Department has been engaged in this project since 2012. In particular, we've focused on the community engagement parts of this project. The reason that we are interested in this project is its potential to create a new amenity for active living on the north side. In years 2012 and 2013, we did do some public engagement around this idea. And we did it in a very traditional way. We sent letters to residents and postcards and had some open houses and some kind of neighborhood level meetings we invited people to come to. What we found with that was that we weren't really doing a great job of engaging kind of the diversity of North Minneapolis residents. Certainly is a very diverse area of our city. And in 2014, we wanted to continue to do engagement and continue to assess what people were thinking about the project, but do it in a different way so that we were able to hear from all sorts of residents in North Minneapolis. So we did it, we had a very different approach. We had a community-based steering committee that included the Health Department and Public Works. It also included a partner called the Alliance for Metropolitan Stability, who's been helping us coordinate all of our community engagement efforts, along with neighborhood organizations, other community groups, and some individual residents who are interested in the project. Together, we worked on a kind of community engagement strategy that involved putting out an application, a competitive application to neighborhood, community-based, culturally-based groups to help us conduct outreach with mini grants, ranging as small as $1,500 and as large as $5,000. And we put the application out and were able to fund 13 different community groups. Those groups were selected by a committee of Northside residents, primarily composed of Northside residents. And the groups that were funded are listed up on the slide here. I won't go through all of them, but they did consist of some neighborhood organizations, North Minneapolis-based organizations, and some culturally-based organizations as well. And I should mention that those grants were managed by the Alliance for Metropolitan Stability through a sub-grant agreement from the city. So they managed most of the grants that went out. So this new process yielded some very different and much better results in terms of engagement. In 2013, when we had some kind of 5 neighborhood meetings and 1 open house with some mailed information to residents, we saw 371 surveys completed about, with people sharing their opinions about the Greenway. In 2014, with this new process, we saw over 2,000 surveys completed. In 2013, we heard from 258 Northside residents. And this year, we heard from over 1,300 Northside residents. In 2013, we asked people who lived directly on the proposed route whether or not they owned or rented their home, because there are a significant number of renters in this section of the city. 4% of the respondents in 2013 were renters, and 26% of the respondents were renters in this round of engagement. In 2013, we did not ask people what their race or ethnicity or language spoken at home was. But we kind of noted, based on who was coming to meetings, that the people who were coming did not represent the diversity of North Minneapolis. This time around, we did ask race, ethnicity, and language, just to really understand what the diversity of the respondents was, and we saw that 55% of the respondents, of North Minneapolis residents in particular, were residents of color. So it was a fairly diverse sample, not quite as diverse as that section of the city, but still quite diverse. With the respondents, like I said, we heard from over 2,000 respondents, and this graph shows where respondents reported living, and I think the one thing I wanted to point out about it was that about 70% of the people who responded were North Minneapolis residents, and we were able to segregate the data by that. We did ask respondents how much they supported or opposed a greenway, the greenway as proposed in North Minneapolis. And of North Side residents, about 70% of respondents supported the idea of a greenway, and about 17% opposed the idea, with the remainder saying they were neutral. We also asked that of people living directly on the greenway route. And from those folks, we saw 60% support and 24% opposition, with the remainder, again, being neutral. Some high-level kind of summaries of some of the qualitative data that we were able to gather from the surveys. People did see the greenway as an opportunity for providing more green space, providing safety from traffic, especially for children, providing space for amenities like gardens or pocket parks or arts, and creating a new North Side attraction that would draw people to the North Side. There were also some significant concerns from the respondents. Parking was probably the biggest concern raised, including for residents themselves, also for visitors, and also considering the needs of elderly or people with disabilities. Safety was also a concern. Some people were, and when I say safety, I mean personal safety. Some people felt like they wouldn't feel very safe on the greenway. I should say that other people felt like putting a greenway in would make them feel actually safer in this space. Another big concern was the cost to homeowners, and that through either increased taxes because of increased property values, also through assessments to pay for the actual construction. And then the last one was maintenance of the greenway itself and of alleyways. The greenway, because people were just wondering who would mow or plow the greenway. And then alleyways, because some people are concerned about accessing their alleyways and making sure they still have very good access to it if they aren't able to drive on their streets. So just a little information about some next steps with the project. The Blue Cross funding that we have goes through July of 2016, so we have a little more time left on the project. That will enable us to further refine some of the technical analyses that were completed and respond to some of the concerns and questions that residents raised. It will allow us to look at the route south of Plymouth. Right now, the southern end of the route is somewhat undefined, and there are some different potential options that could use some exploring. Also some more in-depth engagement and visioning with residents, in particular those living on the proposed route, to really dig in with them and understand what they envision this looking like if it were built, and what their concerns were, and if there's any way to address the concerns, and especially for those who are opposed to this. And also capacity building for within the community to build an ongoing mechanism for community input on this project beyond grant funding, so that there's a continued way to for community members to share what they would like to see if indeed the project continues to move forward. The last two bullets on this, the city would work in close partnership with the Alliance for Metropolitan Stability to accomplish these things for the next 2 years as well through a sub-grant agreement. That is all of the presentation.
Thank you. Any questions per the presentation? Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Stewart, just to go back a few slides into the pie charts, I just want to understand that when you looked at the levels of support for this project, these are actually one prior to that. These are people, this pie chart is not inclusive. You had a way to sort out the 30% of the people that participated that were not residents of North Minneapolis. So this is just residents of North Minneapolis.
Yes, that's correct. That is just residents in North Minneapolis. We have the data also for everyone, but we were able to segregate North Minneapolis residents specifically.
And can you share or speculate rather on that 30% of people participating that were not North Minneapolis residents? Were they generally in support of this project?
Yes, we saw very high support among people who are not North Side residents. I can give you the number for the overall support if you're interested in that. So of all respondents, about 76% were in support of the Greenway once you factor in the people who are not North Side residents. So there was a high level of support among those folks.
Thank you. Mostly I just am trying to comment on the fact that this is the people that live around this project seem to strongly support what you're doing here. And I think that's great. Thanks.
Councilmember Gordon, followed by Councilmember Yang.
Thank you, and it's very exciting to see this coming forward, and I really appreciate Public Works and the Health Department working on this project. Bikeways and these kinds of things are something that I feel very strongly about, and I'm excited to see us adding some greenways in the city. I'm a little bit curious about the decisions of where we're going to have the two-way and the one-way auto traffic, and how we made that determination, and maybe if it's connected at all to the neighbors in the area, or if there were some other considerations there regarding alleys. Part of what I'm thinking is if we come up with a criteria that we're using now, it could easily be applied in the future. And maybe that's a bigger policy decision that we need to grapple with to determine this.
Councilmember Gordon, Chairman Reich, we're not proposing to close any driveways or current on-street access to parcels. So that's one and probably the primary factor where we would steer away from a full linear greenway.
So where there are some areas, though, that it is going to be linear green space with just bike paths and pedestrian walkways. Isn't that true? Some of the pictures show that. And maybe go to the map, which is a little bit hard to interpret. But the solid green stretches, isn't that that has no auto traffic on them?
That's correct. And in those areas, there are no driveways, and a big portion of that is along the cemetery.
And then we have the park. Are there homes on the other side of the street on the cemetery and the park, though?
Yes, there are.
So
they have access through the alley in the back. So in those areas, a full linear greenway would potentially work.
Okay, so now I think I understand. If there's alternative access to the buildings, they're under serious consideration, and then if there's no driveways and curb cuts, then that street is fully eligible, or has determined to become exclusively greenway bike path.
Councilmember Gordon, that's essentially correct, and we don't have necessarily a formal policy that I'm aware of yet. So we're trying to factor in the community input and limit taking any direct access away to parcels on the Greenway.
And so then I guess that gets to the last piece, which is factoring in the community input. So then do we also have all those property owners supporting their loss of access from the street, or are there some conflicts on some of those blocks, or some opposition still?
There's definitely varied support and opposition based on the block. So there are blocks where there will be people who are in support but maybe want to keep parking, and other blocks where people just want to see a full greenway. I think that's why the next step of engagement is so important, so that we really understand what people mean when they say they support it or they are opposed to it, and what those considerations are for residents, so that we can really understand what might make sense on a specific block.
I can appreciate that. It's almost like we need to get the city as a whole to come to some kind of agreement, because I could see a lot of tension here where on a policy level, we want more greenways. We know this enhances property values. It makes it a great place to live. People, although, are real used to having access to their property from the street, deliveries, parties, guests, visitors, whatever. Some people actually think they must own those parking spaces. I mean, I'm sure we've all talked to people who act like that's my part of the world. What are you doing? So I'm not sure how we'll get there. It's always going to be easier if we have the buy-in and consent of the property owners along those streets. So it's going to become real challenging if we have people really, really upset. And then you can have civil disobedience. I don't know what it could become, but you could imagine. So that's a real trick. So I think you're pioneers. You're courageous pioneers venturing forth into this territory. I think that when people see some of these streets, there's one where I live, Milwaukee Avenue. It happened a long time ago. People love it. They appreciate it. It doesn't really have an exclusive bike path. I mean, it's a little bit different, but it's close to auto traffic. And people have figured out how to do it. They don't really have alley access there either. They have some surface parking lots. It's very different, but it's people come from all over to see it. But so I do think I want us to be able to find more opportunities to do this in the city, so that we can look back and say, here's our plan for the city. Here's where we're going to have our greenways, so that we have our bike infrastructure in place. And so I'm really hoping this works out. I'll confess, I was hoping it would be a solid green line all the way through. So we'll be wondering about, do we really need the one-way and the two-way traffic there, and what can we do? So I think it's really been helpful to take the extra year to do more surveying, and I really think taking the time going ahead will also have great benefits. And if there's ways that the council can help, I'm sure there's many of us that would like to assist in that.
Thank you. Councilmember Yang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Councilmember Gordon, with all due respect, I think it would be problematic if it was a full greenway all the way through. I certainly think that the folks up in North Minneapolis and the diverse constituencies would probably not allow for something like that to happen, and I would not support that. I mean, I support some sort of greenway. I think that, when we look at the issue of support and opposition to a greenway, when you ask generally, whether a resident up there supports a greenway, I mean, my best sense is they would be much more like me in the sense that they would support some sort of greenway. But, if you say, do you support a full greenway or something, that is somewhere in the middle, I think they'd probably, be the latter, just like myself. And, in this situation, we talk about this proposed greenway as something that's proposed, but I mean, it seems like, we're pretty set in how we want things to be. And, seeing those pictures and seeing the map, I mean, it concerns me when we talk about how it's proposed, but then we have a set way of doing things. And, I'm wondering if there's any sort of community input as to, the different parts of the Greenway so that eventually, I mean, it will look like something that the community up in North Minneapolis wants, because I get the part about Milwaukee Avenue and how people come from far and wide to come and look at that and just, appreciate that. But I mean, I certainly think, a one-size-fits all approach will not work up in, where I live. So what do you think about that, Ms. Stewart?
I mean, I think I understand thank you, Councilmember Yang. I think I understand the kind of perception that maybe this is the word proposed maybe is referring to something that is maybe more decided than it actually is. I don't think that it is decided. There aren't any decisions made, and that's something we've been trying to really make clear to folks. We have something for people to react to, and I think that's really important, to bring an idea out and see what people think of it. And I agree that it's going to be very important to continue to do engagement going forward, and that's why I think the next 2 years that we're going to be focusing on this are going to be really important into determining and understanding what community residents really want. I think in some blocks, and when people say they support it or they're opposed to it, there's different reasons behind that. We really need to understand what those reasons are and what they mean when they say support or oppose, because it might mean I support it if it's this design, or it might mean I am opposed to it unless I can get that. There's a lot behind that. And so I think our next steps are going to be really to not do surveys, but to really dig in and have those conversations with residents about what it means for them.
And so in 2013, the engagement process yielded, some good numbers, but 2014, the numbers were just fantastic. And I'm wondering, for 2015, when we do this engagement process again, 2014, we spent about $43,000. Is that correct?
That's correct on the sub-grant agreements.
Okay, and so in 2015, with $100,000, I'm imagining, we're going to have like fireside chats with people who are on the Greenway. Is that kind of what you're envisioning?
I'd like to clarify that the $100,000 is to cover the next 2 years.
Okay.
So, and it's up to. So, it's approximately up to $50,000 a year.
Okay, and what for each of those $50,000? What are we getting for that?
Mm-hmm. So, we'd like to continue to do engagement through community partners, so that it's not the city kind of figuring out how to do that, but really working with partners who understand the community, who have community trust, and who people are going to be more willing or interested to talk to and respond to. And so we are working out the details of exactly what that engagement will look like, with our committee members who are from the community, helping us figure out what's the best method for doing that. And then we anticipate doing another competitive process to award funds to community groups that will do the work.
So conceivably, the 13 partners that we had in 2014, we may not have again in 2015 or 16 then. Is that correct?
Councilmember Ring, that is correct. It just really depends on what it'll end up looking like. But there will be a process to decide who will get funds.
So in 2014, with regards to the community engagement process, did we find that some groups are better than others in terms of, the community engagement work, and, what can we learn from those lessons?
Yeah, Councilmember Yang, we did find that some groups were more successful in their engagement. It's a little difficult to compare groups to each other because some groups are trying to reach kind of more difficult to reach folks. But we did see some strength in some of the neighborhood-based groups in particular, and also some of the culturally based groups in their outreach. And so I think we're learning, we're understanding the groups that had the best existing connections to Northside residents were the most successful, and I think that's kind of what we would emphasize going forward.
And the issue of us spending, $43,000 already, and then for the next 2 years, $100,000, that leaves about almost $250,000. What's the plan for use of the additional or remainder funds?
So, Councilmember Yang, the remaining funds are partly to cover city staff time, to assist with the community engagement, and also with the technical planning. And there's also a part of the budget, about $43,000 to hire a consultant to continue some of the technical analyses and the technical planning work.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've been following this project for many years, and I'm thankful for all the work from folks in the community as well as staff. I know we have folks from Twin Cities Greenway and the Bicycle Coalition here who've been very engaged. I have some questions about the potential implementation of this project, and this is a big change, to Councilmember Yang's points, for the community, and it may be hard to imagine a life without being able to drive your car up to the front of your home and get out and walk inside, but I think there are huge benefits as well. And I would really hate to see us spend $16 million to see a very incremental change when there might be an opportunity to really do something transformative if people have more time to get used to the idea. So I'm interested to understand, are we thinking of incremental approaches to implementing, whether that means using small stretches where the neighbors are most supportive of bigger changes? Or is there a way to do something that would have the same sort of transportation impacts, but that would be less expensive? So temporary street closures, or maybe a bicycle boulevard or neighborhood greenway that's, using a less expensive way of implementing, which of course wouldn't have the same greening benefits, but might help people have a chance to see if it's working or not for the community.
Councilman Member Bender, if I might, just a couple of points. It would be a full linear greenway would certainly be a transformative change. So we recognize that we have an awful lot of work to do, both in the outreach and the technical advisory portion, to try to identify, make sure that the stakeholders understand what the changes might be, try to identify what their concerns might be, and then see what we might be able to do to mitigate those concerns. One of your colleagues suggested that we might do something along the lines of the airport noise mitigation in South Minneapolis, and perhaps build new carports or facilities in the alleys. We have a lot of work to do. But then in regards to your question of whether this might be done incrementally or if it needs to be done all at once, I don't think those decisions haven't been made, and we're really not at a point where we could decide that.
Thank you. Councilmember Yang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one follow-up question to Councilmember Bender's point. If we want to approach this from the standpoint of being transformational, I think transformation tends to cost a little bit more money. And I'm wondering, with regards to mitigation, have we, or are we, or will we be thinking about buying people out, the folks who are just, absolutely adamantly opposed to this? And, I can understand if it was, maybe 2 or 3% or 5%. What if it was 33% or 50% of the people there?
Councilmember Yang, I don't know if we've gotten to that level of consideration or decision making in terms of what would actually happen if it were implemented, because it's so early in the process. So I don't know if I can quite answer that question. I think that's something we can, know as an idea that's out there.
Oh, okay, thank you. Any other questions for the presenters? Any further comments? And just to be clear, this is an action to authorize an execution of up to $100,000 to sub-grant agreements for with the Alliance for Metropolitan Stability. And my understanding of that is that those are outside resources that will be utilized to work with our current partner and to cover some of our staff time, is what I've heard. And so that is the motion before us. Any further conversation on that motion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Dissenting nay. Thank you very much. And I guess this is a big stay tuned. I will just note that October 7th, we will have a series of public hearings about sewer water services and all of our community special service districts. And with that, we have completed today's agenda. We are adjourned.